"You saved me, so now according to the sacred law I must bear you a children," said the Apache woman. The sun was unforgiving that day. John had been walking for hours across the vast, empty desert, and his body was exhausted. His water bottle was empty, and the heat seemed to press down on him from every side. He had thought he could handle the journey on his own, but now he realized how unprepared he was. His throat burned, and every step felt heavier than the last. Sand seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and the distant mountains offered no comfort. They were just jagged shapes in the shimmering heat. John's thoughts began to blur as his energy faded. He tried to take a deep breath, but the dry air made it difficult. Every movement was painful, and the sun's glare made him squint until his eyes ached. Just as he felt like he could not go any further, he saw something in the distance. At first, it was unclear, a shadow, a movement. But as he struggled to focus, he realized it was a figure moving quickly and gracefully across the dunes. Panic and hope mixed in his chest. Could it be a mirage? He had heard stories of people seeing water or shelter that did not exist, only to collapse in the heat of disappointment. But this time, the figure seemed real, moving steadily toward him. The figure came closer, revealing itself to be a woman. She wore clothing that blended perfectly with the desert around her, earthy browns and muted reds, and carried a small bundle on her back. Her skin was sun-kissed, and her dark eyes held a sharp, attentive focus. She moved with confidence and skill, as if the desert were a part of her very being. She approached John without hesitation, assessing him carefully. When she reached him, she knelt down and spoke in a language he did not understand. Her voice was calm, melodic, yet firm, and John realized she was asking if he was hurt. He tried to nod, but his throat was so dry that only a weak croak escaped. Understanding his struggle, the woman quickly acted. She reached into her bundle and produced a small gourd of water. John's hands trembled as he took it, and he drank slowly, almost greedily. The cool water was a relief he had never imagined possible. Each sip revived him slightly, giving him the strength to lift his head and look around. The woman smiled briefly, not condescendingly but with a quiet satisfaction, as if she knew she had saved a life. She motioned for him to follow her. At first, John hesitated. He did not know who she was, where she was taking him, or what her intentions might be. But his body was too weak to resist, and something in her calm confidence made him trust her. Slowly, with her steady guidance, he rose to his feet. His legs felt like lead, but with her support, he managed to take a few steps before collapsing again. The woman did not scold him or express impatience. She merely helped him stand and led the way. As they moved, John tried to ask questions, but his words came out jumbled and incomprehensible. The woman, however, seemed to understand enough from his tone and gestures. She spoke occasionally in her language, pointing to landmarks in the desert and then to herself, as if introducing herself. He caught the word Yana and repeated it, hoping he had said it correctly. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the attempt, then turned her attention back to the path ahead. The journey was slow. The desert was harsh, and John's energy was minimal. But Ayana moved with ease, occasionally pausing to pick small plants or check the ground, as if she were reading the land like a book. John watched her in awe. She seemed part of this world in a way he could never imagine. Every movement was purposeful, every glance aware of the dangers around them. He realized he had been blind to the beauty of the desert before, seeing only the difficulty and threat it posed. Now, through her presence, it seemed alive, almost welcoming, though still dangerous. After what felt like hours, they reached a small area where the landscape changed. A narrow creek ran through it, with green shrubs and small trees growing along its edges. The air felt cooler here, and the sound of water was a relief to John's tired ears. Yana led him to a shaded area under a tree, helping him sit down carefully. She knelt beside him, producing some food from her bundle, a piece of dried meat and some berries. John took them eagerly, tasting flavors he had not enjoyed in days. The food was simple but nourishing, and he felt a little stronger with each bite. As he ate, John began to notice details he had missed before. The way Ayana's eyes scanned the area constantly, checking for movement or danger. The small, intricate decorations in her clothing, which seemed to tell stories he could not yet understand. The way her hands worked with careful precision, whether arranging the food or adjusting his position for comfort. Every detail spoke of a life lived close to nature, guided by knowledge passed down through generations. When he finished, John tried to speak again, wanting to thank her properly. He realized words might not be enough. Instead, he gave her a small, awkward nod, hoping she understood his gratitude. She smiled faintly, then motioned for him to rest. For the next few hours, he lay in the shade, watching the play of sunlight through the branches and listening to the gentle murmur of the creek. Slowly, his body recovered strength, and his mind, once clouded by exhaustion, began to clear. As evening approached, Ayana gathered some more materials from her bundle and started a small fire. The flames flickered and danced, casting a warm glow on the surrounding area. John watched as she worked, amazed by how natural her actions seemed. She had an almost magical ability to take the raw elements around her, wood, stone, fire, and create comfort and safety. For the first time since he had been lost, John felt a sense of peace. As night fell, Ayana prepared a simple sleeping area for him, using blankets and mats she had brought. She motioned for him to lie down, and although he was still weak, he felt safe for the first time in days. He tried to ask more questions about who she was and where he was, but the words failed him again. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a silent reassurance, and John understood that she would answer in time. For now, she was simply taking care of him as she had promised. Lying there, John reflected on the day's events. He had come into the desert alone, confident and unprepared, and had faced near death. Yet through this stranger's compassion and skill, he had survived. There was a mixture of awe and humility in him. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. Yana, with her calm strength and quiet authority, had become more than just a savior. She was a guide, a protector, and perhaps, in ways he did not yet understand, a teacher. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, John felt a sense of wonder. The desert, which had seemed so hostile and empty, now felt alive with possibility. He thought about the day ahead and the journey that had brought him here. For the first time, he understood that survival was not just about strength or knowledge alone. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to accept help when it was offered. And for that, he knew he owed his life to Ayana. By the time John drifted into a deep sleep, the fire crackling softly beside him, he felt a mix of gratitude and curiosity. He had been rescued from death, and now he was in a place so different from his own world. There was fear, yes, but also an undeniable excitement. Tomorrow, he would begin to learn more about this mysterious woman and her people, and perhaps in the process, discover parts of himself he had never known. The next morning, the desert seemed calmer, almost gentle in comparison to the harshness John had experienced the day before. Sunlight filtered softly through the trees near the creek, casting long shadows across the sand. John woke slowly, his body still stiff from exhaustion, but feeling stronger than he had the previous day. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and noticed Ayana already awake. She was moving quietly, arranging small things from her bundle, preparing food, and checking the surroundings as if she had done this every morning for decades. John watched her, fascinated. There was a rhythm to her movements, a connection to the land that he could not comprehend. Every glance she gave, every careful step, spoke of knowledge born from experience, not books. He tried to speak, to ask about her life or where they were, but the words came slowly, and she only smiled. She seemed to understand enough to know he had questions, but for now she was focused on the tasks at hand. When breakfast was ready, a simple meal of dried fruit, corn, and fresh water, Ayanna gestured for John to eat first. He did so carefully, tasting each morsel and feeling nourishment return to his body. She watched him silently, her eyes calm but sharp, like a hawk observing its surroundings. John wanted to ask more about her life, about the village she came from, but he also felt a growing respect for her silence. There was a lesson in it, though he did not yet know what it was. After breakfast, Ayanna finally began to speak. Her words were in her native language, soft but firm, and John could only catch bits and pieces. He tried repeating the few words he understood, and she nodded slightly, acknowledging his effort. Then she drew in the sand, using a stick to create symbols and lines that formed pictures. She showed him images of the desert, of animals, and of people. Slowly she began to explain the traditions of her people, pointing to each image and speaking the corresponding word in her language. John listened intently, trying to piece together the meaning. Eventually, the conversation turned to something deeper. Ayanna paused and looked at John seriously, her dark eyes steady on his. She spoke a few words slowly, then repeated them several times, trying to make him understand. John finally caught the meaning. She was speaking of a sacred law, a tradition of her people. According to this law, when someone saves the life of a member of the tribe, a bond is created that carries great responsibility. She explained that this was not a punishment, nor a command meant to harm, but a rule that was deeply respected by her people. John's mind raced. He had heard of many customs and traditions, but this one seemed so personal, so serious. It was not just a simple thank you or a repayment. It was a life-changing commitment, bound by honor and trust. He felt a mixture of awe and fear. On one hand, he was grateful to be alive. On the other, he did not fully understand the weight of what Ayanna had just told him. She seemed to sense his hesitation and spoke again, this time more gently. She explained that this bond was sacred, and while it could take many forms, it was always meant to honor the life that had been saved. John nodded slowly, trying to absorb her words. He realized that this law was not meant to frighten him, but to teach him something important about respect, gratitude, and the connection between people. Still, he could not help but feel conflicted. His own world had different rules, different ways of showing thanks and loyalty. Here, in this desert, surrounded by people whose traditions he barely understood, he was forced to confront ideas that were completely foreign to him. For the rest of the morning, Ayanna took John on a walk through the nearby area. She showed him how to identify plants that could be used for food or medicine, how to find water hidden beneath the sand, and how to move quietly to avoid scaring animals. Each lesson was simple, yet it carried layers of meaning. She spoke of life, survival, and respect for the land, and John realized that these lessons were intertwined with the sacred law she had spoken of. To understand the law fully, he first needed to understand her people, their connection to the desert, and their values. As they walked, John began to notice how other members of the village watched them from a distance. He could see the curiosity and caution in their eyes. They did not approach, but they observed closely, perhaps assessing whether he could be trusted. Ayanna seemed aware of their attention and simply smiled faintly, continuing her lessons without acknowledging them directly. John felt the weight of their eyes, realizing that he was not just learning from Ayanna, but from the entire community. Every action, every word, every gesture carried meaning. Later, they returned to the small shaded area by the creek. Ayanna sat cross-legged on the ground and motioned for John to do the same. She began to explain more about the sacred law. She spoke of balance, of respect, and of duty. According to the law, a life saved was not just a debt. It was a responsibility that required understanding, care, and sometimes personal sacrifice. John listened carefully, trying to imagine what this meant in practice. He wondered if he would ever be able to fully honor such a tradition, coming from a world so different from hers. Yana could sense his uncertainty. She did not scold or criticize him. Instead, she shared stories of others in her tribe who had faced similar situations. She spoke of men and women who had saved lives, who had been saved in return, and how their actions had strengthened the community. These stories were filled with courage, patience, and understanding. John realized that the law was not a burden. It was a way to build trust and connection between people. Still, the personal nature of the bond made him uneasy. As the day passed, John began to understand more. He realized that the sacred law was not about forcing someone to act against their will, but about creating a relationship based on mutual respect and responsibility. Yana's calm demeanor and gentle explanations helped him see that this law was rooted in a deep understanding of life, death, and human connection. He felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because he now understood the purpose, apprehension because he still did not know how he would navigate this new reality. By evening, John and Ayana sat near the fire she had built. The flames flickered, casting warm light on their faces. Yana spoke softly, describing the roles of the elders, the importance of family, and the ways the law guided decisions in the village. John listened, absorbing every word, feeling a growing respect for the culture he had entered. He realized that survival was not just about food and water, but about understanding people, their values, and their ways of life. As night fell, John felt a strange mixture of comfort and tension. He was safe, alive, and learning from Ayana, yet he also knew that his life had changed in ways he could not yet fully grasp. The sacred law was now a part of his story, a quiet weight that would influence his decisions and actions from this moment forward. He felt both honor and uncertainty. How would he honor this law? Could he adapt to a world so different from his own? And what would it mean for his relationship with Ayana? Lying on the soft mat she had prepared, John thought about the events of the day. He remembered the moment she had first explained the sacred law, the stories she had told, and the lessons she had shared in the desert. He realized that understanding was only the first step. Action would come later, shaped by respect, courage, and care. For now, he could only rest, reflect, and prepare himself for the journey ahead. As he drifted into sleep, the night sky stretched endlessly above him. The stars shone brightly, mirrored by the gentle flow of the creek nearby. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, now felt alive, filled with lessons and possibilities. John understood that he had been given a second chance, not only at life, but at learning something deeper, about honor, responsibility, and the bonds that connect humans across time and culture. And at the heart of it all was Ayana, the woman who had saved him and now guided him into a world he had only begun to understand. The following morning, John awoke to a quiet stillness in the village. The sun was rising slowly, painting the desert sky in soft shades of gold and pink. The warmth of the day promised comfort, but John felt a new kind of tension pressing on him. Yesterday, Ayana had explained the sacred law, and now the reality of it was settling in. He understood what it meant, and he could not ignore the responsibility that had been placed on him. A part of him wanted to flee, to return to the world he knew, where rules were simpler and debts were easily repaid. But another part of him felt a strange sense of duty. He owed his life to Ayana, and he could not deny the bond that had been created between them. Ayana approached him quietly, as she always did. Her calm presence had a grounding effect on him, and he realized that her strength was not only in her skills or knowledge, but in her ability to face difficult truths without fear. She gestured for him to follow her, and they walked together to a small clearing where the elders of the village often met. John's heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. He had heard stories of tribal elders, wise and respected, and now he would meet them personally. This meeting would clarify the sacred law further and perhaps help him understand his role within it. The elders were waiting in a semicircle, their faces solemn yet welcoming. Each one carried an air of authority, their eyes observing John carefully. Gianna introduced him with a few words and the elders nodded, acknowledging his presence. One of the older women, her hair streaked with silver and her eyes sharp, spoke first. Her voice was gentle but firm, and she explained the sacred law more deeply than Ayanna had before. She spoke of life, death, and the responsibility humans had to one another. Saving a life, she said, was not a simple act. It created a bond that demanded respect, care, and sometimes personal sacrifice. John listened intently, trying to absorb every word. He realized that this law was not meant to trap him, but to teach him something fundamental about human connection. The elders spoke of trust, of honor, and of the delicate balance that held communities together. They explained that while he had no obligation beyond what he chose to accept, refusing the law without understanding its meaning would dishonor not just Ayanna, but the community that had welcomed him. The weight of their words pressed on him, but he also felt a sense of clarity. This was not just about obligation, it was about respect, about understanding a world different from his own. After the meeting, Gianna led John back to the small creek where he had recovered. Along the way, she spoke softly, encouraging him to share his thoughts. John admitted his fear and uncertainty. He told her he did not fully understand how he could honor the law, how he could navigate a world so different from the one he had left behind. Gianna listened patiently, her expression calm, and then she spoke of choice. The law, she explained, required understanding and intention, not blind obedience. John realized that he had the opportunity to make a conscious decision, to embrace the bond with knowledge and respect, rather than fear. As the day passed, John reflected on his options. He could leave the village and return to the world he knew, abandoning the sacred law entirely. It would be safe, familiar, and simple, but doing so would feel wrong. He owed his life to Ayanna, and her care had given him a chance to live when he had almost died. Ignoring that debt would leave a void in his heart, a sense of failure he could not bear. On the other hand, accepting the law meant changing his life, stepping into a world he barely understood, and embracing responsibilities he could not yet fully imagine. The choice was daunting, but he felt a quiet determination growing inside him. In the afternoon, Ayanna introduced John to other members of the village. They were cautious at first, observing him from a distance, but slowly he began to earn their trust. He listened to their stories, watched their work, and tried to participate in small ways. He helped gather water, assisted with basic tasks, and learned to move through the land with awareness. The villagers' cautious acceptance reminded him that every action had meaning here, that every choice reflected on his character. He realized that the sacred law was not just about him and Ayanna, it connected him to a community, a lineage of people who valued life, respect, and trust above all else. That evening, John and Ayanna sat near the fire. The flames danced in the night, and the crackling sound seemed to fill the air with energy and life. John spoke again, sharing his thoughts and fears about the sacred law. Ayanna listened closely, her eyes reflecting both understanding and patience. She told him that accepting the law was not a decision to take lightly, but it was also not something to fear. The bond it created was meant to honor life, to encourage care and connection, and to teach lessons about responsibility and trust. John felt a sense of relief, knowing that his choice could be guided by respect and understanding, not by obligation alone. Over the next few days, John continued to learn more about the village and its people. He observed their daily routines, their careful interaction with the land, and the way they respected one another. Every action seemed purposeful, from the way they gathered food to the way they taught children. John noticed how Ayanna interacted with the community, her presence calm but strong, her actions guided by both care and wisdom. He began to see the sacred law not as a rule, but as a framework for living honorably, creating bonds that strengthened individuals and the community alike. One afternoon, Ayanna took John on a walk to a nearby ridge overlooking the desert. The wind was cool, and the view stretched endlessly, revealing the vastness of the land and the smallness of human life within it. She spoke of the history of her people, the generations who had lived in harmony with the desert, and the lessons they had learned from the land and one another. John listened, feeling a deep sense of connection not only to Ayanna but to the world around him. He realized that the sacred law was part of a larger understanding, a way of life that honored existence itself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the sand, John felt a shift within himself. The fear and uncertainty that had weighed heavily on him were slowly giving way to determination and acceptance. He understood that the choice before him was not easy, but it was meaningful. Accepting the law did not mean giving up his identity. It meant embracing responsibility, understanding, and connection. He looked at Ayanna, her face calm and patient, and felt a quiet confidence that together they could navigate this new reality. That night John lay awake, thinking about the elders' words, the villagers' trust, and Ayanna's guidance. He knew that tomorrow he would have to make a conscious choice about his role in this world, about how he would honor the sacred law. The decision was not simple, but he felt ready to face it with honesty, respect, and courage. For the first time since being lost in the desert, he felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that life had given him a second chance not just to survive, but to grow, to learn, and to connect. As the stars filled the sky, John felt a calm determination settle over him. The desert, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now seemed full of lessons and possibilities. He understood that his journey was just beginning, that the choices he made would shape not only his life, but the bond he shared with Ayanna and the community that had welcomed him. And for the first time, he felt ready to embrace the sacred law, not as an obligation, but as a path toward understanding, respect, and a deeper connection to life itself. The days that followed were filled with learning, adaptation, and quiet reflection. John began to understand the rhythm of the village, the careful balance between humans and the land, and the unspoken rules that guided every action. The sacred law, once an abstract concept, was now becoming a living part of his life. He felt its weight not as a burden, but as a responsibility that demanded awareness, respect, and patience. Still, the challenges were real, and the path forward was not easy. From the first day, John noticed that integrating into the village was a delicate process. Some villagers were cautious, observing him silently as he attempted small tasks. He helped gather water from the creek, assisted in preparing food, and tried to participate in daily chores. Each act required focus and care. A careless mistake could upset the delicate balance of the community. John quickly realized that respect was earned through action, through consistent effort, and through genuine attention to the needs of others. He worked slowly, carefully, mindful of the traditions he was beginning to understand. Ayanna guided him through each step, correcting him gently when he made mistakes and praising him when he succeeded. Her presence was constant, a calm reminder that he was not alone in this new world. But even with her guidance, John felt the weight of the sacred law pressing on him. He knew that honoring it was not just about following instructions. It was about internalizing the values it represented: trust, loyalty, respect, and care for life. Every task, every interaction became an opportunity to practice these lessons. One afternoon, while John and Ayanna were gathering herbs near the edge of the village, a distant sound reached their ears. Voices, raised and urgent, carried across the desert wind. John turned to see a small group of outsiders approaching, unfamiliar faces moving quickly and carelessly through the landscape. Panic rose in his chest. The village had always seemed protected, hidden by the vast desert, and now there was a threat. Yana noticed his tension and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. She moved quickly, signaling him to stay close. Together, they watched as the outsiders neared, recognizing immediately that their intentions were uncertain. The villagers, alerted by Ayana's quiet signals, began to gather, forming a protective line near the creek. John watched, understanding now that his role was not just to follow the law, but to actively participate in the community's safety. He felt a mixture of fear and determination. The sacred law had prepared him in ways he had not realized, not just to respect and honor life, but to act responsibly within it. When the outsiders finally reached the edge of the village, they were surprised to find resistance. The villagers did not act aggressively, but they stood firm, united and alert. Yana stepped forward, speaking to the outsiders in a calm but firm tone. John watched her, amazed by her confidence and authority. She conveyed that the village was protected, that its people and traditions were to be respected. Slowly, the outsiders retreated, recognizing the strength and unity of the community. John felt a sense of pride. He realized that the sacred law was not an abstract idea. It was living, active, and powerful, shaping not just individual behavior, but the survival and cohesion of the entire village. After the incident, John and Ayana returned to their daily routines, but the experience had changed him. He understood the delicate balance of trust, responsibility, and vigilance that guided life in the village. The sacred law was not just a moral guideline. It was a framework for living harmoniously with others, for creating bonds that could withstand both natural challenges and human threats. John began to embrace this understanding, finding strength in his connection to Ayana and the community. Over the next days, John faced additional challenges. He struggled with the physical demands of life in the desert, the long walks, the heavy chores, and the unpredictable weather. There were moments of doubt when he wondered if he could truly adapt, if he could honor the sacred law as it deserved. But Ayana remained patient, guiding him through each difficulty with quiet encouragement. Her faith in his ability to learn and grow gave him confidence. He began to see that the law was not about perfection, but about effort, integrity, and willingness to act responsibly. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John and Ayana sat together on a ridge overlooking the desert. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of dry earth and sage. John reflected on the past weeks, the rescue, the introduction to the sacred law, the elders' guidance, and the challenges he had faced. He realized that each step had been a lesson, shaping not only his understanding of the law but his understanding of himself. He had learned patience, humility, and the importance of connection. Yana spoke softly, breaking the silence. She reminded him that the sacred law was not only about obligation, but about choice. He had the opportunity to honor it with intention, to build a life rooted in respect, care, and mutual understanding. John listened carefully, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and determination. He knew now that his path was not simple, but it was meaningful. The law was not a chain. It was a guide, leading him toward growth and understanding. The next challenge came unexpectedly. During a routine gathering of firewood, John accidentally startled a small herd of animals near the village's water source. They scattered, and a few villagers shouted in alarm. John froze, realizing immediately that he had disrupted the delicate balance of the environment. Yana rushed to his side, helping him calm the situation. Together, they worked to restore order, guiding the animals back and reassuring the villagers that no harm had been done. John felt a wave of relief mixed with humility. He had made a mistake, but he also realized that every action had consequences and that the sacred law required awareness, responsibility, and learning from errors. As the weeks passed, John grew stronger both physically and emotionally. He learned to move through the desert with skill, to understand the habits of the animals, and to anticipate the needs of the village. His bond with Ayanna deepened, built on mutual respect, trust, and the shared experience of survival. He began to see the sacred law not as a rigid rule, but as a living framework guiding behavior, encouraging care, and fostering connection. The challenges he faced, physical, social, and emotional, became opportunities to grow, to strengthen his understanding, and to honor the bond created by his rescue. One evening, as the sky turned a deep indigo and stars began to appear, John sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on his journey. He remembered the fear and confusion of his first day in the desert, the pain of exhaustion, and the relief of being saved by Ayanna. He thought of the sacred law, once a source of uncertainty, now a guiding principle shaping his life. He realized that honoring it required courage, patience, and commitment, not just to Ayanna, but to the entire community that had welcomed him. In that quiet moment, John felt a sense of peace. He understood that the sacred law was more than a tradition. It was a way of life, a means of creating trust, respect, and connection in a world that could often be harsh and unforgiving. The challenges he had faced were not obstacles but lessons, teaching him the value of responsibility, care, and intentional action. He looked at Ayanna, sitting nearby with calm confidence, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had guided him through fear and uncertainty, helping him see the meaning and purpose behind the law. As the night deepened, John realized that he had grown in ways he had never imagined. The sacred law was no longer an abstract concept or a distant obligation. It was a living, breathing part of his life, shaping his choices, actions, and understanding of the world. He knew that the journey ahead would continue to test him, but he felt ready to face it with integrity, respect, and a commitment to the bonds he had formed. The challenges he had encountered, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned had all prepared him for the future, a future shaped by the sacred law, guided by Ayanna, and connected to the community that had embraced him. The desert was quiet that morning, the sunlight soft and warm on the sand. John awoke with a sense of clarity he had never felt before. The weeks he had spent in the village had changed him in ways he could not have imagined. The fear and uncertainty that had weighed heavily on his mind were gone, replaced by understanding, respect, and a sense of purpose. The sacred law, which had once seemed so foreign and daunting, now felt like a guiding force, shaping his actions and decisions with care and intention. He knew that today he would have to make a choice, a decision that would define not only his future but the bond he shared with Ayanna and the community that had embraced him. Ayanna approached him quietly, as she always did, her presence steady and calm. She could sense the determination in him, and she smiled faintly, a gesture that carried both reassurance and pride. Without words, she gestured for him to follow her. Together, they walked to the small clearing where the elders had met him weeks before. John's heart beat steadily, no longer with fear but with resolve. He understood now that the sacred law was not a punishment, nor a chain to bind him. It was a path, a guide for building trust, respect, and meaningful connection. The elders were waiting as they had been before, their faces solemn yet welcoming. John stepped forward, feeling the weight of their eyes upon him. He spoke slowly, carefully, expressing his thoughts with honesty and sincerity. He acknowledged the debt he owed, not just to Ayanna, but to the community that had welcomed him, guided him, and taught him the ways of the land. He spoke of his understanding of the sacred law, of the responsibility it represented, and of his commitment to honor it with intention, care, and respect. The elders listened quietly, nodding in approval, recognizing the sincerity in his words. Yana stood beside him, her presence a comforting anchor. She had guided him, taught him, and shown him the meaning of the law through her actions, patience, and wisdom. Now, John was ready to take his place within this world, not as an outsider, but as someone who understood and respected the bonds that connected them all. The elders offered their guidance, reminding him that the law was living, requiring attention, effort, and integrity every day. John listened carefully, absorbing their words, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the trust they placed in him. Returning to the village, John began to fully integrate himself into daily life. He worked alongside the villagers, gathering water, preparing food, and assisting with various tasks. Every action was an opportunity to honor the sacred law, to demonstrate care, respect, and understanding. The villagers who had once observed him with caution now welcomed him with quiet approval. They recognized his effort, his sincerity, and his commitment to the community. John felt a deep sense of belonging, a connection that went beyond survival. It was a bond rooted in trust, respect, and shared experience. Over time, his relationship with Ayana grew stronger. They shared quiet moments by the creek, long walks through the desert, and evenings by the fire where stories were told and lessons were learned. John began to understand the depth of her character, the courage, wisdom, and compassion that guided her actions. He realized that their bond was no longer simply about the sacred law, but about mutual respect, understanding, and shared experience. It was a connection built on trust, care, and the recognition of each other's strengths and humanity. One afternoon, Ayana took John to a hidden part of the desert, a place where the earth rose in gentle hills, and the wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. She spoke softly of the generations who had lived on this land, of the lessons learned from the desert, and of the balance that must be maintained between humans and nature. John listened, feeling a profound sense of awe. He realized that the sacred law was not only about human bonds, but also about harmony with the world around them. Every choice, every action was connected to something larger, something enduring and meaningful. As the day faded into evening, John and Ayana returned to the village. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light on their faces as they sat together. John reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the desperation of being lost in the desert to the understanding, connection, and growth he now experienced. He realized that the sacred law had not limited him. It had expanded him, guiding him toward empathy, responsibility, and a deeper understanding of life. That night, under a sky filled with countless stars, John and Ayana spoke of the future. They discussed the possibility of children, the continuation of life, and the blending of their experiences and traditions. The conversation was gentle, thoughtful, and full of hope. John understood that the sacred law was not just a rule to follow, it was a framework for creating life, connection, and continuity. He felt ready to embrace it fully, not out of obligation, but out of respect, care, and love. In the days that followed, John's commitment became evident in everything he did. He participated actively in village life, learned more about the traditions, and continued to grow in understanding and skill. The villagers accepted him fully, no longer as a stranger, but as a trusted member of the community. Gianna and John worked together, side by side, strengthening their bond and honoring the sacred law in every action. Their connection was built not only on survival, but on shared values, respect, and the recognition of life's preciousness. Over time, the village thrived, supported by the harmony and cooperation of its members. John realized that the challenges he had faced, the harsh desert, the cultural differences, the fear and uncertainty, had all prepared him for this life. The sacred law had guided him, teaching him lessons that went beyond obligation. It had shown him the meaning of responsibility, the importance of trust, and the power of human connection. Through it, He had discovered courage, humility, and a sense of belonging that he had never known before. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, John and Ayanna stood together, looking out over the desert. The land stretched endlessly before them, beautiful, vast, and full of life. John felt a profound sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given, for Ayanna's guidance, and for the sacred law that had shaped his journey. He understood that life was not simply about survival, but about connection, respect, and the choices that defined each day. The village continued its rhythm, each member contributing in their own way, guided by traditions, trust, and mutual care. John and Ayanna's bond grew stronger, grounded in respect, understanding, and shared experience. They prepared for the future together, aware of the responsibilities and joys that lay ahead. The sacred law, once mysterious and daunting, had become a guiding principle, shaping their lives with meaning, intention, and hope. As the stars emerged one by one in the night sky, John felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenge, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the world around him. He had embraced the sacred law not as an obligation, but as a path to understanding, growth, and meaningful connection. And through it all, he had discovered the depth of human trust, the power of shared responsibility, and the enduring bond between himself and Ayanna. The desert, once a place of danger and uncertainty, now felt alive with possibility. John knew that challenges would continue to come, but he also knew that he was no longer alone. With Ayanna by his side, the guidance of the elders, and the support of the community, he was ready to face whatever the future held. The sacred law had shown him the meaning of life, connection, and responsibility, and he had chosen to honor it fully, embracing the new life he had been given with courage, respect, and love. And so, under the vast sky, with the fire crackling softly at their feet and the desert stretching endlessly before them, John and Ayanna took the first steps of a new beginning, a life shaped by trust, guided by tradition, and filled with hope, understanding, and the promise of the future.